All right, so this is the recording. This is, what are we at? March 24th. This is our 1050 class. I said that for myself so I could listen to the recording and know who I'm talking to. All right, so thank you for attending today. We'll let this session be a conclusion to our discussion about the powers of the presidency. That's what we'll do right now. We already said that there are 4 sources of power that the president is able to depend on. I'm watching the time. I'm going to try and stop talking in about 30 minutes or so. So, right, we said that there are 4 sources of power that the president is able to draw from. Number 1, we said the Constitution is the source of power. We call that the expressed powers or the formal powers of the Constitution, of the president rather. Amongst those are the notions that the president can veto legislation, the president can he can nominate members to the bench, justices to the bench. He can nominate the leaders of his government. He can grant pardons and reprieves. Along with the constitutional or formal or expressed powers of the president, there are the delegated powers or the statutory powers of the president. When we say delegated and statutory, we mean to say the powers that the president receives from Congress. We said that when the Congress gives the president power in the context of James Madison's Federalist Number 51, where Madison said ambition must be made to counteract ambition, we said that we questioned rather why the Congress would give power to the president knowing that they're in competition. So our conclusion is that delegated powers occur because the Congress gains more power than it actually gives up, because it can avoid blame for things that happen wrong, and it can lay claim to credit when things happen correctly. Along with constitutional and delegated or statutory powers, there are the inherent powers of the president. We saw that Article 2, Section 3, the president has the power to faithfully, not the power, the responsibility to faithfully execute the law, the power to faithfully execute the law. So that's what we call the take care clause. And so from the take care clause, we said that the president has the ability to lay claim to powers that are not inside the Constitution as long as he can justify it as being necessary for his constitutional responsibilities. And lastly, along with the constitutional, the delegated, the inherent powers, we said the 4th source of power are those powers of persuasion. 1980, Richard Neustadt writes this book called Presidential Powers, the Power to Persuade. And well, the book is called Presidential Power, where he says presidential power is the power to persuade, and the ability to persuade is the according ability to bargain. In this book, Richard Neustadt essentially says the president is a glorified clerk or a senior secretary as he looks to convince people to do things that they might not otherwise do if they weren't being convinced by the president to do so. So when you sum it up for Richard Neustadt, he says, while the president has powers, the president might not have power, presidential power to persuade. Now, we've got the 4 sources of power for the president. We also ran through the special powers of the president. Most of these flow from the accordant inherent power, right? So executive orders, emergency powers, executive privilege, executive agreements. Now, let's drop down here. I'm scrolling, and let's locate our attention on the war paradigm. The war paradigm. I'm on slide 60. Just follow with me. The war paradigm is where the President of the United States lays claim to the constitutional responsibility to be the commander-in-chief. And the president says, because he is commander-in-chief during a time of war, then the president says, I have the ability to make and enforce the law however he sees fit. Here we go to, let me make it nice and big for you. Here we go to Article 2 of the Constitution. Scrolling is somewhat slow. Let's go to Article 2 of your U.S. Constitution. Article 2, Section 2 is where you find the powers of the president. And here you see that the president of the United States is the commander-in-chief of the Army and the Navy. He's the commander-in-chief. That means he's in charge of the military. Well, the president says during his wartime capacity as commander-in-chief, that means that he has the power. The war paradigm is where the president asserts the ability to override the constitutional system of checks and balances and make and enforce the law however he sees fit. I wonder what you think. No, this is a rhetorical question, no need to answer, but I wonder what you think about that claim. I want you to sit on that for a little while. If you're like, go back and listen to the recording, I want you to sit on that for a little while. Now let's think about a few things. The liberal and the conservative tend to have a position about how much power the president should be able to lay claim to. Here I bring to you Martin Luther King's famous quote in the letter from a Birmingham jail written in 1963. The book is called Why We Can't Wait. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." He says, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." I wonder if you hold that to be true. Can we allow presidents to grow their power ad infinitum if we believe that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere? That's the liberal commenting on the responsibilities of the state. Now let's go to the conservative, again commenting. Remember, we talked about substantive democratic theory, right? The question is whether or not the policies of the government are in line with our understanding of what it means to live in a democracy. And so the conservative, Russell Kirk, wrote this book in 1953 called The Conservative Mind, where he said, the best we can do towards redeeming the states of Europe and Asia from the menace of revolution and the distresses of our time, and this is Russell Kirk, is to realize our own conservative character, suspicious of doctrinaire alteration, respectful towards history, preferring variety over uniformity, acknowledging a moral order composed of human persons, not of mere political and economic atoms subservient to the state. For the conservative, in the words of Russell Kirk, we have not been appointed the correctors of mankind, but under God, we may be an example of mankind. Do you accept that this is true? This means if these things are true, if you accept from the conservative that we are not the correctors, but an example of mankind, if you accept, in the words of Martin Luther King, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, I wonder what you make of a few factoids. We are talking about not the theoretical powers of the president, but the real world applicability of the powers of the president. 20 more minutes. The American military has a presence in 91% of the world. What is the American military doing in 91% of planet Earth? All right, look at this, right? There's only about 193 countries that are signatories to the UN Charter. The American military has a presence on the high level in 177 of those countries. That means that the United States then, and we're not talking about embassy personnel, we're talking about a literal military presence in 91% of the world. Why is that happening? All right, let's look at what the American military is doing. It's hard, number one, it's hard to come up with the literal number of bombs that are dropped here, right? But people that watch military activity, they do estimations. Some of them I think we can take as authoritative. Here's the link that for the site that I'm quoting here, right? Hold on, let me move this thing out of the way. All right, and so George W. Bush was president for 8 years. And in that 8-year time period, remember, he starts the war in Afghanistan. He lies the country into the war in Iraq. These wars are still happening right now. George W. Bush's legacy then is something that tens of thousands of military men are living with every year. Okay, George W. Bush, in his 8 years of presidency, dropped 70,000 bombs on 5 countries. Now, remember, part of the role of the president is his, not role, let's say, part of what presidents want to do is they want to leave the White House stronger than it was when they found it, right? Presidents want to grow their power. They looking to, like, Bush had a certain amount of power. Then Obama comes into power and he grows it. And then Donald Trump grows the power of the presidency so that whoever comes after him enjoys a more enhanced presidential set of powers. So Obama comes into office looking at Bush dropping 70,000 bombs, and over the 8 years of Obama's presidency, he dropped 100,000 bombs and dropped them on 7 countries. Okay. Now, I have not seen numbers for how many bombs the Trump administration has dropped in 2018 and 2019, but in 2017, those numbers are out there and they are clear. In 2017, the military under Trump dropped 44,000 bombs. Now, let's compare, right? Bush president for 8 years, 70,000. Obama president for 8 years, 100,000. If Trump does nothing but keeps up the current bombing levels and he stays president for 8 years, 44,000 times 8, all right, that's not right. I am trying to give you a big number, but not that big. 44,000 times 8 equals 352,000 bombs. So it is possible then if Trump stays in office for 8 years, that he'll drop 352,000 bombs. Wait a minute. Martin Luther King said, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Russell Kirk said, we are not so, arrogant as to think that we can appoint ourselves correctors of mankind, but should be an example of mankind. But what do we make of this level of bombing that's occurring around the world on behalf of the American presidency? Some links so you can challenge those numbers. Now, let's keep this in mind. Let me go to another page, right? In 2000, I believe we're looking at the year 2011. There is this guy called Anwar al-Awlaki, right? He was born in New Mexico. Remember, the 14th Amendment says, let's look at it together. I'm pressing a point here. Remember, your 14th Amendment says, if you're born in the United States, then you are a citizen of the United States. And then it says, no state shall make or enforce any law abridging the privileges and immunities of citizens. So if you're born here, you're a citizen. And then the 14th Amendment says citizens have rights. Citizens have rights. Okay, so Anwar al-Awlaki was born in New Mexico. That makes him a U.S. citizen, and that should mean that he has certain rights. However, the Obama administration essentially dropped a bomb on him. I don't remember if I cracked this joke, so if I have, you'll forgive me, but I want you to say this out loud. Even if you're on mute, say this out loud. I want you to say Obama 15 times fast. Are you ready? Let's do it. Obama, 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 bomb, 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 bomb. You get my joke? But Obama is your drone war president. Obama was dropping bombs on a lot of people. And one of the people that he did this on was Anwar al-Awlaki. So they have a press conference, and the press secretary says, we would like to announce that we have, engaged in targeted assassination against a major recruiter for Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. They call that AQAP, named Anwar al-Awlaki, right? They're saying we killed him. The press says, wait a minute, what do you mean you engage in targeted assassination? Is that something that we do now? The Obama press secretary, I'm paraphrasing all of this, right? The Obama press secretary says, yes, in order to make the world safe from the scourge of Islamic terrorism, we have a list of individuals that we feel is necessary to be removed from the world scene. And the press says, wait a second, you got a list? How many people are on the list? How do you get on the list? What's the evidentiary proof to put people on the list? How do you get off the list? Who decides who should be killed, who should be let off, right? And so it became a bit of a scandal. Let's open up the webpage. It became a bit of a scandal. And so in the middle of that scandal, the Obama administration, well, a leaker in the Obama administration essentially leaked, make it bigger, this thing here called a white paper, right? A white paper is a legal argument that's used to justify a policy of the federal government. Now, let's read a line or two together. Let's look at this line here. This white paper, in which the Obama administration was talking to itself and somebody leaked it to the press. That's how, we're able to see it. When they were talking to themselves, they said certain aspects of this legal framework require additional explication. They're saying, let me explain something to you. First, the consideration that an operational leader present an imminent threat of violent attack against the United States does not require the United States to have clear evidence that a specific attack on U.S. persons and interests will take place in the immediate future. What? What does the United States not need to have in order to engage in targeted assassination? It says does not require the United States to have clear evidence. What do you not need to have? Clear evidence. The Obama administration then is asserting that it can engage in targeted assassination without evidence. If you don't have evidence, then what do you have? This then leads us to think about how the Obama administration and then how presidents themselves conceive of the power of the president, right? Look at Rahm Emanuel. Early in the Obama administration, he was Obama's chief of staff. He left the position of chief of staff to go on and be the mayor of Chicago. Right now, Rahm Emanuel is, he's one of those commenters. They offer, he's on CNN and MSNBC and such, right? Rahm Emanuel said, read this last line with me, right? He's talking about how to use power. Let's quote him. He says, in politics, power is not static. It doesn't mean that you just use it willy-nilly. Rahm Emanuel says you must use your power strategically and surgically, right? But as you use it and accumulate it, it's not to be used. It's not like a thing you can just sit over here and put underneath your blanket or underneath your pillow. It doesn't mean you use it randomly. You can't be careless about it. He says you have to be strategic and surgical about it. And if you are successful, it accumulates to help you achieve other goals. That your ability as a president to successfully use your power means that you are going to be growing your power and growing it and growing it. Thus, the aggrandizement of power by every president leads to the power of the presidency. That's the Obama administration. Look at what the Attorney General of the Trump administration said just last November. 10 more minutes. Attorney General Barr, November 2019, gave a speech to the Federalist Society. If you don't know the Federalist Society and you want to understand how Donald Trump is making appointment after appointment, dozens and dozens of conservative appointments to the federal bench, he's essentially pulling from a list given to him by the Federalist Society. These folks, this is a conservative group of lawyers and jurists, and they are essentially looking to, let's say, engage in a conservative makeover of American jurisprudence. That's just a good, tight way to say it. Now, for Attorney General Barr in his 2019 speech, he is talking about unitary executive theory in a way that he's saying the president should have the ability to decide which laws he will and will not follow, right? And so I'm not going to read it right now, but you're free to look at the slide yourself or pause the recording and check this out. So essentially, you have the Obama administration, and then you have the Trump administration agreeing that presidents have just a lot of power. right? Should have a lot of power. This is what we're talking about in context of the war paradigm. Almost done. The Trump administration has had numerous investigations occurring, many of them simultaneously, over the past 3 years, right? Just cast your eye on some of these things, right? Many of these things, if we were sitting in class, I don't want to say it on a recording, right? But if we were sitting in class, we could talk about, for example, you know, how the guy that was in charge of the National Enquirer, the parent organization of the National Enquirer, he was trying to blackmail Jeff Bezos, and Jeff Bezos at the time was cheating on his wife and was sending, let's say, intimate pictures to his mistress, and somebody hacked Jeff Bezos's phone. I think that's a remarkable thing because Jeff Bezos is the richest man. I think he's like the richest man on planet Earth. And if you can hack that guy's phone, then look, what do you do about my phone if you can hack Jeff Bezos's phone, right? And they wound up taking his sexy time pictures and trying to blackmail him about this. And why would the president of the parent organization of National Enquirer try to blackmail Jeff Bezos? Because Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, and this guy was looking to get Jeff Bezos to tell the Washington Post to stop publishing critical stories critical of Donald Trump, right? That type of scandal in a past age would have been enough to throw off the presidency. And Donald Trump has had numerous of those scandals, right? The New York Times has looked at Donald Trump's relationship with Deutsche Bank and the Russian bank VSB and the Russian mob. We are clear that Stormy Daniels, the adult film actress, gave an interview where she talked about spanking Donald Trump with a magazine, and he had to pay her money through his now jailed lawyer to keep it on the hush. Numerous investigations, right? But through it all, the president of the United States, Donald Trump, has been able to lay claim to this war paradigm, right? Been able to try to decide what is and what's not legal, what the laws he'll follow and what laws he will not follow because of this expanded notion of presidential power. Almost done. Walk through these slides with me, right? I wanted to show you some things just to look at the decline of secrecy, the diminution of the First Amendment and the Ninth Amendment, your right to privacy, your right to free speech, looking as a result of these things that presidents are doing to enhance their power. So some things. All right, last point. We just said that the war paradigm is where the president in his wartime capacity as commander-in-chief makes and enforces the law as he sees fit. I want you to read through this argument, but along with this, I want you to lay claim to an understanding of the signing statement. A signing statement prior to the Bush years, it used to just be where the president of the United States would sign a bill into law and would then issue an essay where he talked about why he signed the bill, talk about the historic significance of the bill, talk about the policy relevance of the bill. Well, during the Bush years, during the years of simultaneous war in Afghanistan and Iraq, pursuant to the war paradigm, the Bush administration used the signing statement as a form of line item veto. So for example, let's say that this whole slide is a bill. A line item veto would be where the president says, I agree with all of this stuff, but this clause here, I don't like this, so I'm gonna take this out. I'm gonna veto this particular line item, right? Well, and this is something that Bill Clinton asserted the ability to do. The Supreme Court looked at it and found that the line item veto was unconstitutional. But the Bush administration began using the signing statement as a form of a line item veto to pick and choose what laws he will allow himself to be bound by, and then pick and choose what laws he won't have to follow. And the Bush administration did this over 750 times in over 600 cases. We're talking about a large amount of these things, right? Some examples. This is a signing statement from one piece of legislation where the Bush administration said, while they're signing this bill into law, the executive branch shall construe as advisory the provisions of the act. They're saying that we might do this, we might not do it. We're just going to take this as advice. The signing statement concludes such provisions, if construed as mandatory rather than advisory, would impermissibly interfere with the president's constitutional authorities to conduct the nation's foreign affairs and the like, right? So they're saying that if this bill makes us do something, then this would make someone else besides the president have the ability to supervise the executive branch, and that's something that they won't abide by. That's what Attorney General Barr is saying if you go back and read that quote. And here's just another example of the signing statement. All right, so I'm ready to stop talking. So what I'm offering to you here is you've got 4 sources of power for the president. You've got, okay, and one of those sources of power are the inherent powers. Pursuant to, or as examples of inherent powers, you've got 4 special, quote unquote, special powers of the president. That is true, right? And then, get out of here. And then we're using the war paradigm as a real world example of how presidents aggrandize or try to grow the power of the presidency. Yeah, all right. I think that's, get out of here. I think that's good. All right, so how was that? Is that enough for today? You folks, that inspire any questions? I'm gonna end the recording. Let me end the recording. Hold on. Let me end the recording.